Okay, everyone, we are back with Chris Logan, my co-host, and this is Michael
Howdy.
O'Gorse, and we're going to tackle yet again another year of anniversary albums. There's a lot of good year anniversaries, anniversary for albums this year, but we're going to tackle 1989, which was a pretty mammoth year for rock and alternative rock in particular. It's kind of, I guess, the one of the big years kind of foretelling what the 90s were going to be like because it was such a diverse year for music. So there's a lot going on here. We had to do some research because we're old codgers, and I can't believe these albums are 30 years old. It just blows my mind. It just
Right,
does not seem real. It doesn't seem real to me. That doesn't make any sense that these are 30 years old. I just can't fathom it.
right. Yeah.
But
It is a huge year. It's like a turnkey year into what, just like you were saying, that where something like alternative music or college rock really was turning into a more mainstream fare. And so there was a lot of these records that were, I think, milestone records that turned not just these bands but the entire genre into a mainstream success. Sell out, platinum records, selling out tours, merchandise, everything. Everything was much bigger on a much bigger scale at this point.
and this really was, I think, the year that 120 minutes became kind of an institution. Like it was like every Sunday you had to get ready to watch 120 minutes because that would kind of give you a blueprint of what things to look out for. And
Oh yeah,
it was a massive, massive year. So I think what I'm going to kick off with, just because they turned 30 last Thursday, is the Cult Sonic Temple. And that's
right.
the band are going to celebrate this year. They're doing a Sonic Temple tour, which is kind of weird because I was reading an article with them and describing as the main set will consider the core songs of Sonic Temple. I'm like, well, what exactly are the core songs? That's a odd.
Right.
That's a
Are you
odd.
just saying singles?
Yeah, because I read an interview with Ian, and of course he was like, well, for many people it's just Firewoman and Sweet Soul Sister, but it's more than that. And went on, and I'm like, yeah, he's right. But I'm like, are you guys not going to play Firewoman and Sweet Soul Sister? Because that would make no sense. You're going to like
Right.
skip the two biggest hits. But I'm like, Sonic Temple's a really weird album. Um,
It is.
I mean, when it came out, it was like, I mean, that's the Cult's biggest mainstream moment, and that appeared in the top five. I think it was a top 10 debut. It sold over 1 million copies, maybe more. They did a bunch of high profile tours. I'll discuss that in a little bit,
Yep.
but that was really like the album that broke them big. I mean, Electric, Love made a little headway in college rock. Electric got them, into like the rock fans. It's like Tipple
Right.
was. It just shows you what a weird band the Cult are, and they're one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
But they are able to dip their toes into so many different genres because they're obviously they have some goth influence, some post punk. They came from a punk background,
Yeah.
but then they're also unapologetically in the '70s rock, arena rock. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
so they've got this weird, 1 foot in alternative, 1 foot in like classic hard rock. And and they somehow managed to even appeal to a lot of the hair metal fans for a bit, even though
Yeah.
they don't really. The aesthetic is totally different. I mean, they had
Right.
long hair and they wore leather, but they did not look like poodles. You know what I mean? I mean, they had more.
Right.
I think there was another genre around there called biker rock. With like L.A. Guns and people that weren't quite so frizzy. And I think the Cult kind of fell more into that on this thing. But this was
Yeah.
this made them like a major arena act for a while. It didn't last for long because they
Yeah.
would eventually go back into kind of their roots. But Firewoman, of course, was a huge, massive hit. And when I think of this album, I think even though it's their biggest hit for me, I'm more of a Love Electric kind of guy. I think
Yeah.
that
Same here.
that the singles that were I think Sun King was fantastic. That's one of their best. I love that
Hmm.
that opening with the bass line and everything is really great. Solo Asylum was pretty cool. Soldier Blue is probably my second favorite because it's a great riff.
I had forgotten about that one.
Yeah, that's and then
That's a good one.
but some songs like Automatic Blues, I mean, I maybe that won't make the chorus set, or Wake Up Time for Freedom. They could skip both of those. Those aren't their strongest, but American Horse is a good tune. And Edie, of course, it was like their power ballad. It was which was so
I think that was a hit around here. I don't know if it was.
Yeah, it was a pretty. It was like the video was on MTV quite a bit, and
okay.
But
I remember it being a pretty big song around here.
And what's funny is I've read so many articles about it, and when I interviewed Billy Duffy, we didn't really touch on it too much, but that was a major highlight for me, was talking to that guy, because he was super cool dude.
That's awesome.
Just so very approachable. But I read so many articles where they really, and do you remember the Cult did a Behind the Music? Do you remember that? They did one on the Cult.
You know what? No, I don't.
And it's like I
missed a lot of behind the music stuff.
But what I've gathered from a lot of interviews was that Ian really wanted to make an album that was kind of more in the vein of the post-punk stuff. He was really into like a lot of garage rock at the time, like bands like the Fuzztones and stuff that was really kind of proto grunge stuff. He was big into Soundgarden. They were like mutual friends with that band and Mother Love Bone. And he wanted to go in that direction, but Billy wanted to do like the big arena rock album. So Bob Rock, of course, catered to that, and Ian didn't really like the production of it, and they butted heads so much that eventually they started for a band that's only like basically a trio, and others are hired guns. They had two different buses, the Ian bus and the Billy bus. I mean,
oh man!
And like Ian was
in that the tale of the '80s.
Yeah. And
we got the Eddie bus, we got the David bus, we got the Michael Anthony bus.
I mean, it's ridiculous. So yeah, they're doing a 30th anniversary tour, celebrating this album. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on it further, or as far as what your memories of it are? Or?
Well, it was the third record, and it was a third different sound from them.
Yeah, everything was.
I kind of felt like it was a band that was just looking and looking and looking, and I mean, where Love, of course, is the one that I love the most.
Yeah.
But not to say that I didn't like Electric, because Electric was so cool and groovy. But I think my heart was really into that neo psychedelia kind of sound that they were doing on Love. And so whenever they hit Sonic Temple, that was, like you said, going towards a little bit more of a arena sound. I started to lose a little traction with them. Not to say that I didn't like some of the songs off of it, because I certainly did, but it was another sound from the same band, which in retrospect you got to hand it to them, and that's something that bands these days just don't really do. They don't tinker with their sound anymore.
Yeah,
at least not on a mainstream level. And so, regardless of whether or not I was really into it, 30 years on, I can give them a lot of credit for, going for it. And creative differences aside, and their personal issues with each other, that's great for a band like the Cult, who were fairly mainstream at that point, because Electric really put them over. Rick Rubin production on that. I think it was Rick Rubin who did Electric.
Oh yeah,
Electric, isn't that right?
Yeah, did the whole AC/DC aesthetic there.
I mean, and then to turn around and put out something like Sonic Temple was kind of gutsy, honestly. Because don't you want another Electric?
Yeah.
I mean, we all wanted another Master of Puppets, but hey, so be it. And good for them, though. It's not a favorite record of mine, but on a creative level for a band like the Cult, this was a really good move, and a fairly decent record, honestly.
And it kind of married both sounds, really, because you had the big rock riffs of Electric, but you also had some of the atmospheric touches of Love on there. There's a lot more like echoey guitar, and it was kind of a good balance of that. And it's interesting because I think you saw a lot of Bowie influence on them as far as like being able to reinvent themselves, which is why Ceremony was such a kind of a bland follow up because it was very like a Sonic Temple Part 2. I think that was a big creative, and
Right.
it hurt them because it
Exactly.
came out right at the height of grunge, so it was like the worst time thing. And I feel like if they had put out their '94 album, which I think is amazing, actually, and we can talk about that when we. Oh my God, Kat, what'd you just do? Ugh. He like sat on the keyboard and erased all these. Oh my God.
No kidding.
Oh my God. All right. Anyways, yeah. So, did you ever hear the 1994 album? Maybe it was 95. I have to double check.
Is that which one was that one? Was that Ceremony?
Had the goat head on the cover. It was like it was self-titled.
Oh no.
It was.
No, I didn't.
It's great. It's like it's Bob.
I probably did, but it was like a 1 or 2 time thing. I mean, I was well in the stores. We listened to it, I'm sure, but I was already. I had fascination with something else at that point, probably.
Mm-hmm. But I felt like if that had come out instead of Ceremony, I think they would have been much more relevant because that was more of their like alternative influence coming back in. And then of course they bounced back to a bunch of different styles since then. But Sonic Temple was definitely the biggest album they ever did, and I'd be curious to hear how they're going to approach it on their tour if they're not going to play all the songs. I'm just curious what's going to make the final cut. So I'll be paying attention to those set lists for sure.
How about we touch on Doolittle real quick?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do Doolittle.
So, yeah, Doolittle. In order, it's really the second record from the Pixies. Being Surfer Rosa being the first one. I guess Come On Pilgrim was the EP.
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere along the line, somebody from Warner Brothers really liked the sound, but they still had their deal with 4AD. But this record was it for me. It was really a big turning point record, along the lines of like the Sonic Youth Daydream Nation. This was like this comes second on that list as to what was shaping, I think, the sound of future alternative music on the radio. There's no way you can't find anybody, especially at any time through the 90s, that didn't say that Doolittle did not influence you at all. From Kurt Cobain to whoever you are.
Radiohead,
maybe
PJ Harvey.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the sound it was still unique, and mind you, it was almost different from Surfer Rosa. Surfer Rosa was almost like it had its heavy moments, but you felt a lot more like acoustic, a lot more of an acoustic indie out of that one, and that's a great record by every indication of it. It was a fantastic record. But what I liked about Doolittle was just from the opening track. I was just floored whenever I heard the basser completely.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a couple songs on here that I'll tend to skip. Was it Silver towards the end? But as far as and I used to skip Here Comes Your Man because it was such on heavy rotation.
Mm-hmm.
But after kind of digging into it a little bit, it was made for like next to nothing. Mind you, it wasn't like a Nirvana Bleach that was made super cheap, but for a major label album, it was made for next to nothing, and went on and just created such a unique sound in alternative that it still lasts today for me.
Yeah, I
can still put that record on. It feels fresh.
I feel like Doolittle was like much more involved with atmospherics and just really trying different stuff instead of kind of like just the big kind of pummeling stuff, or like you said, the acoustic stuff. There's a lot more layers on this one. I mean, Here Comes Your Man is such a weird track. It's like It's almost as
It
like
is.
this kind of Beach Boys kind of feel, and like the bass line
Yeah.
and the guitar and all that, and then you got Monkey Gone to Heaven, which is this really
Right.
strange, very atmospheric track. But
Right.
then you've got, Wave of Mutilation. I mean, I Bleed. You've got so many, Tame. There's so many good songs,
Yeah.
and they're really kind of firing on all cylinders here. And it's also got my favorite Pixie song ever, which is "Gouge Away," the last track,
Gouge Away. Yeah. Yeah.
which is a strange euphemism for sex, if I'm correct from reading
Right.
inspirations. But it's just got such a good groove, and it's like dark and eerie, and it's got that really heavy, chorus. It's just really awesome. Yeah, I mean, Doolittle was just one of those albums that came out. It was like a college rock, staple. I mean, it was huge, and I I think it's interesting too. Is Wave of Mutilation, which I absolutely love that version. I also and equally love the version they put on that Pump Up the Volume soundtrack. The it, oh, I love that. It was like they took the whole thing and made it in this entire different beast, And the Pixies, to me, I'm not a big fan of the recent stuff, but those first four albums are they're all great in different ways. But Doolittle
Yes.
is arguably their best one. I think you could argue that even over Surfer Rosa. I know that's kind of like the jockeying point for a lot of people, but I actually think Trompe Le Monde may be my favorite. But I know that's kind of like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. I was going to say, for those first four, gosh, Trompe Le Monde, I think, because at the time that was the final record. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw them open for U2 on.
Oh, that's right.
On tour, and I thought, man, I don't know how that's going to work, because I mean, I'd seen the Pixies in a small club. It was amazing. Let me tell you, they filled the sound completely. There was a reason why they were a much bigger band in Europe, is because they were able to play to so many people, and their sound fit. But Doolittle is still a fantastic record. I go to it once every 6 weeks at least, probably since then, and maybe get on kicks to where I listen to it nonstop.
Yeah,
it's still a great freaking record. It really is.
and I think a good segue from that, since the Pixies covered Jesus and Mary Chain's Head On Trompe Le Monde, how about we move on to Jesus and Mary Chain's Automatic, which also came out in '89.
Yep.
And it was that was kind of their big turning point record too, because they had some indie success, obviously with Psycho Candy is their critical favorite, Just Like Honey. But Automatic, was really kind of gave them an updated sound. It had a lot more of even though it wasn't very electronic, they had drum machines, which they've had, I think, on prior albums, but it really had a cool synthetic kick to the percussion, and they kind of dialed back the feedback for just more kind of straight ahead garage rock riffs, and it paid off. I mean, obviously, Blues from a Gun was a great rockin' track. It's just an awesome kind of Peter Gunn style riff, and Head On, which is one of their best tracks. And if you ever seen them live, even I saw them a few years ago, and they were just badass. And that came on, everybody was just losing their mind. It was great. And it's weird though, because it's like, even though those hits were big, you don't really hear a lot of love for the rest of the album. It's kind of confined to those two tracks, but that's unfair, because there's a lot of great stuff. You got Here Comes Alice, which is a really cool kind of moody opener, and then Between Planets, which is maybe my favorite song off of there, which kind of has the same vibe as Head On, but it's like even more kind of kind of a euphoric, and just a real great riff. The lyrics aren't very deep. They never are. It's always about drugs and come here, and the girl of this, and the boy. It's just very this minimalist style that it just works for them so well. It's like this. I think that somebody called them the Beach Boys on acid, and that's the perfect description, I think, of Jesus and Mary Chain. So I still listen to it now and then. If I hear Head On the radio, I always crank it up. but it's got
Sure. Oh yeah.
but it's got a lot more than just those songs, you know. I mean, Drop's a great song. Halfway to Crazy. There's a bunch of good tracks on that. So I don't know
Yeah.
how,
Yeah.
how
It is a turning record for them, because that sound. I think that sound just lived for that record, didn't it?
yeah, because they went from
I mean,
that
because
to Honey's Dead, which was
back to almost Honey's Dead, which is almost. I mean, that's about as close to Psycho Candy, I think, as you're going to get from them at that point,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and that's a great.
Because it had a lot of feedback and
Mm-hmm.
and started to go back a little bit more, which is a theme that I have, but bleak, a little bit more bleak.
A lot more dance beats too.
It was almost like their groovy record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Automatic was.
yeah.
I remember it being on high rotation for me. You know, that was a fun record, and I think that's whenever when did we see them play Lollapalooza?
That was
Right
that.
in the day,
Yeah,
which was silly.
yeah. That was for Honey's Dead. That was the Lollapalooza.
Now he's dead. Okay, I was thinking so because I started to think maybe they played Reverence during that set.
That's a good track.
But yeah, that's a really good track.
Yeah, that was actually Reverence was the highlight of seeing them when I saw them a couple years ago at Emos, because they just took that track and just like it just got this crazy, like, I don't know what the feedback was nuts, and they just really took it to like a whole new level. It was really tripped out. It was amazing. Yeah. I mean, I felt like I was like on acid, even though I was only had a few drinks in me. It was that kind of like vibe, you know. That's how you know a band's great, when they make you feel altered. But yeah, Automatic's just a really good, fun album. You know, it's not too deep.
It is.
It doesn't overstay its welcome. It just bam, 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 and then you're done. So I think Automatic is definitely you know, if you think of '89, you think about driving around, and you think about blaring Automatic a lot.
Oh yeah, that is a good driving around record.
Just really, really a lot of fun. And well, I guess on that track, as far as talking about feedback and guitars and good and grooves and all that, another album came out that was on your list to mention was Bleach, Nirvana's debut album, full length album. And what are your thoughts on Bleach? Thinking back on it,
man, that kind of goes leans back on that Doolittle, where you want to talk about something that was made for nothing. I mean, the production wise, it kind of sounds like they made it for a couple cases of beer. I think they made it for like $6,000 at the time, and you know, I'm pretty certain that initially it didn't do well, but of course, you know, by 1991, whenever they break through, it started out well. It became Sub Pop's best-selling record. There's not a whole bunch going on with it, except for I think that they were emulating a lot of what was happening in next door to them. You know, they were just trying to do kind of what everybody else was doing at that point. You know, there was Mudhoney and I think was Mother Love Bone around at that point.
Yeah,
had to have been.
And Soundgarden and.
But just being deliberately, you know, sad. Even though I'm sure that there's not a lot to do. I'm sure at that point, except for like making music and getting high or something like that. But the songs are pretty manic and bleak. Once again, it's part of my theme for today. But it's not a great record, and the only reason why I really pick it is because it's Nirvana, and it should be talked about because
you get the blueprint of the sound.
People often forget. Yeah, I think people often forget.
They don't start with Nevermind
these days. Yeah, because by the time that you get to Butch Vig behind the desk for him, on Nevermind, they're living Kurt's John Lennon dream at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a lot to it. I still love the record though, just because it's a snapshot, and we should all remember that record as being just part of a completely nationwide movement.
Well, yeah, and it's got significance because About a Girl, the band really popularized on their acoustic 120 minutes. I mean, unplugged set on MTV, and that's a really great example of like Cobain's like John Lennon style of writing.
Yeah,
big hooks, atmospheric, wistful, dark, as you mentioned.
Right.
So that's a great track. Negative Creep, badass.
Negative Creep, yeah.
I mean, his
Love Buzz.
Yeah, Love Buzz. Floyd the Barber, which is one of my favorites because it's just so twisted and weird and gender bending, and so there's Bleach is a really great launching pad for that band. It kind of but I don't think if you told anybody when you listen to Bleach that they become one of the biggest bands on the planet, they would be like, what?
Right.
They should have, they were destined in many minds to be, kind of like a Dinosaur Jr. or like a Sonic or like a Sonic Youth, a band that had a core audience that was very devoted but never got to be big. And somehow, it's very strange. Somehow they became the biggest band on the planet, and I'm still not sure quite how that happened. It's just crazy.
Yeah, me neither.
Because I just remember I started going to this new school, and a friend of mine was playing Bleach, and he's like, "This new album called Nevermind by the same band. Like, check it out." And I'm like, "This is really good. This is really catchy." I dug it, and then 3 weeks later, the video came out, and then like a month later, the biggest band on the planet. I'm like, "This is crazy." I mean, I just remember like this band that I never heard of 3 weeks ago is now the biggest band on the planet. And yeah. So Bleach is like the epitome of humble beginnings.
It is
for sure. And speaking of humble beginnings, I mean, the perfect segue for this is to talk about another grunge debut, or at least a major label debut, not the first album, but Soundgarden came out that year with Louder Than Love, which is, I mean, truthfully, that's one of my favorite albums by them. I love it. And it wasn't very popular either, didn't get very, very big, but you really saw the potential on that for how big those guys were going to get, and just how they were doing this really weird hodgepodge of kind of like the big rock of the cult and some post-punk stuff. I mean, they had a lot of similarities to that, but really super, super, super raw. Terry Date produced it. Of course, he produced, a lot of Pantera stuff and Prong stuff. Just a really great metal producer. And it sounds super heavy. I mean, you got Ugly Truth, you got Hands All Over, which I've always dug that song. That again got the Jimmy Page Middle Eastern vibe to it. They actually played that. They play that and Get on the Snake. Do you remember that really weird movie, Lost Angels? Do you remember that movie that came out? It was where it had Adam Horovitz from King Ad Rock was the main guy. It's just right. So that I saw that in the theater. That's where I first heard Soundgarden, and then my friend bought the album. And we were like, this is some awesome shit, because the Loud Love is great, but the one that always got me, and the one that I still, if I hear it, to me, it's Soundgarden's best song, and also their most like underrated song, because nobody people know about it. But Gun, I think Gun is a really good song because it's really weird, because it starts off really slow, and the entire, if you listen to it, the entire song, it picks up the pace, and it goes faster and faster and faster until the very end. And I don't know, it must have been a hard song to record. You got to be really cognizant of changing the rhythm up and building momentum up, so it just keeps changing and changing. It's just a really, really cool song. The riff is great. But then you had the more, I guess, kind of somber moments like I Awake, which is written by I forget the guy's first name. I think Hiro Yamamoto, who was their bassist until Ben Shepherd joined for Bad Motorfinger.
Right.
But he was, he had some really cool stuff on there. No Wrong, No Right, and then full on Kevin's mom, which is really kind of it just makes you feel uncomfortable because you
I forgot about that one.
yeah, just the whole song having sex with somebody's mom is just really messed up. And and Big Dumb Sex, which is probably the worst song on the album, but it's also pretty funny because it's like
Right.
they're like Spinal Tap kind of parody. So it's just, there's not one bad song on there. It's solid rock. It shows you that how they were just really
You could just really tell how much potential was going to happen with those guys. I mean, it's a fantastic rock album. It's a fantastic record. And then you could just tell that, man, these guys, I need to get this next record. Because what's that going to be like? And all they needed was just a little bit more behind the board to sharpen up the sound a little bit more time together to write, to really fine tune those songs. And of course, the payoff is incredible, incredible with Soundgarden. Absolutely.
But
this was just the beginning, and you could really tell. You could really tell that this was just the beginning for that band.
And of course, if you had to pick one thing for the album to remember, of course, it's Chris Cornell's voice, where you're like, "Holy shit, this guy is the real deal."
Cow.
This guy's multi-octave range. I mean, just hit those high notes, and then to get that surly baritone, the mix that he did of both those styles. And I gotta tell you, of all the people that we've lost from the whole Seattle scene, it's been so many.
Yeah.
I mean, you got Kurt Cobain, you got Lane Staley, who both celebrated anniversaries for dying on the same date over different years, which is crazy to me. That's so weird.
Right.
How they both died on the same date, even though they were different years. But Chris Cornell, for me, really kind of hurts the worst because he seemed like the guy that kind of had it together. It was still doing
exactly.
Still doing stuff, still sounded great. I saw him a few years prior on the Nine Inch Nails tour with him and Soundgarden, and they sounded fantastic.
Oh man, I wish I'd seen that now.
and it just really bums me out because I mean I hear his songs and I actually get sad listening to him just because I'm like, this guy.
Yeah.
But then you hear songs like Suicide and Fell on Black Days and The Day I Tried to Live, and it has this whole extra like layer of just sadness to it because you realize this was a depressed guy. He just for a while navigated it better, and I think he got on some bad meds and he just kind of took.
I gotta tell you, for me, those songs just were not that I didn't feel like at that point that he was speaking from a personal stance.
Yeah, it was all metaphors.
I thought he was just feeding in part of lyrically into the genre. I mean, there like when it comes to, which I'm sure we'll talk a little about in just a little bit, but like I don't think Robert Smith is that depressed. His songs are dark and there's not a lot of hope there.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really saw Robert Smith as a person that suffered from so much crushing anxiety or depression.
Yeah, that he would like.
And so, hearing about Chris Cornell being just as hurt as he was, it that hurts me.
Yeah, it was
because he was one of us. He was more one of us, I think, than like a Lane Staley. That's how I feel about it. He was just, a guy that had, he's married, he had kids, and I had no idea that he was in such internal pain.
Because I mean, you figure if a rock singer gets out of his 20s and he's into his 30s and moves on, and as he matures, he's like, okay, he's escaped that trap. He's escaped the trap of dying young, of these things happening. Because Cobain and Staley died, when they were very young. Staley is also one that gets me because he was so amazingly talented. But all these guys, but Chris Cornell was kind of like, he was also kind of like a buffer zone. He was one of the guys who did tributes to Andrew Wood, did tributes to Cobain and Staley. He was just very much like an ambassador, and he kind of felt like he was all above it all, like he had it all together. He was like, in the Eddie Vedder camp where they were like kind of like the older brothers to the younger guys.
Right. They made it. Like you said, they made it.
Yeah, and
they survived that period,
and then
and here we are.
And then to have it happen like this just seems just all the crueler. But yeah,
Yeah.
Louder Than Love, great album.
Louder Than Love, great record.
I just love it. I still dig it, and even though it makes me bummed out, I still listen to it because it's great.
Yeah.
So where should we head to next?
Let's see. What did I have? My list keeps going away. Why don't we get happy for a little bit?
All right.
Hey, how about a little bit of Beastie Boys, Paul's Boutique?
There we go. The antithesis of depressing
now
rock.
That's a happy record. That's a happy record, right?
Is it?
You know, at the time though, what a sad record for them because it flopped. It was not.
Yeah.
It was not Licensed to Ill. And you want to talk about people turning their backs on them? I mean,
I did. I heard "Hey Ladies." I'm like, I don't know what this is. I was like,
I'll be honest. I'm almost part of that crowd too. It took me so long to understand and feel that record because of everything that I got from them off that first record. Which that's a mindless, great, fun record.
Oh, I love that's still my favorite, even though they got so much deeper and more complex afterwards.
Right. But after, gosh, I'm not even sure how long it took me to really comprehend what was going on with this album. But Paul's Boutique, I can turn around and say that's probably my favorite record from them. Such a disappointment initially at first, but there's so much going on there, and if you try to make that record today, it would cost you millions of dollars.
Oh yeah,
millions, just because of all the samples used on it, and being able to get the rights to all the bits that they did. I think it was really the Dust Brothers who had. They were the producers of that album, and so the Dust Brothers basically had all these kind of mashups that they were doing, and the Beastie Boys kind of just went in and listened to what they had and laid their own work over their work, and so I mean that kind of shows you a little bit of a little bit of genius of the Dust Brothers, who those guys were pretty amazing for that time. I think it is, and I've seen it labeled as the Sgt. Pepper's of hip hop, and I'm okay with that label. I mean, just because of everything that's going on in that record, Let me get to my list of what was on it, because in these days of track 1 or 2 or whatever it is, man, it's been so long since I've I've paid attention to the tracks, but Shake Your Rump.
Oh yeah,
man, what a fun song. I mean, that should have been your poolside song from, what was that, 1989 until now. Just a fun, just hanging out. Eggman was fantastic. High Plains Drifter. What's cool is the Wikipedia will list all the samples that they did on each song, and it's just stupid. It's just dumb.
Well, I mean, all I gotta say,
stuff.
Any album that samples the Psycho theme has got my stamp of approval. I mean, I don't remember what track that was on, but I remember that Psycho theme just playing. I'm like, that's genius right there. That was fantastic.
Right. And you know what? I couldn't tell you exactly which one it is, but I think it's a record that was such a labor of love for them. I need to get the Beastie Boys book to delve in a little bit more. Or actually, the audiobook. Have you heard about that?
No, I have not.
So it has actual celebrities like Chuck D's on it. Rachel Maddow
Oh, wow.
reads. Yeah. So, and I think this is starting to become a trend with some of the audiobooks. But Will Ferrell does a chapter.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of clips from some of it, but it's them reading the book, and I need to get in and find. Actually, I just need to buy it like that so I can listen to it. But I need to dig a little deeper on what they were going through, because I mean, you know, they're under that sophomore record pressure.
Sophomore slump.
You know, yeah, and that's exactly what it ended up being. But it is such a beloved record now.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah,
I still need that record.
Yeah, it really.
It's gonna be poolside with me this year. I can tell you that.
I mean, you list the greatest hip hop albums. I mean, it's definitely on there, and it's definitely and it really set the stage. You know, for when they did come back. You know, they had a major comeback with Check Your Head. You know, there's a lot of the influence on there translated to Check Your Head. It was kind of a more rock oriented return to that. There still was the weird flourishes, you know, that Paul's Boutique had, and I think it's worth mentioning too that the Dust Brothers, although they were never like, you know, household names, they carried a lot of cachet and with a lot of producers, because the Chemical Brothers, who have a new album out this month, which I'm dying to check out. I need to check out on Spotify because I hate when I miss albums coming out and I don't have a chance to review them because I get so wrapped up in other stuff. So this just came out of nowhere, but they actually almost got in a lawsuit because they called themselves the Dust Brothers when they came out. They were such fans, which is just kind of weird they would do that. But that's why they became the Chemical Brothers, because the Dust Brothers were like, you got to change your names, dude, because that's stupid. Right. So they did and became stars in their own right. The Chemical Brothers are a great duo, but I don't, you know, they were obviously very influenced by the Dust Brothers, who have done, you know, they did the Fight Club soundtrack, which is great.
Right.
I mean,
that's really good.
But so their production is just, it's huge. They did a fantastic job on that, and I am glad it eventually got its due, as often is the case with albums that gets.
And it's just a freaking, it's a fun record, man. It really is. You know, if you want to dig into lyrical content and talk about, you know, how introspective it may have been, it's not.
No.
I don't think it is. I just don't think that, it's just still three dudes from Queens. I think they were from Queens. Man, that's going to kick me in the ass if they're not. Well, I'll just say New York City. How's that?
There you go.
But three guys from NYC that were just having a great time. Still trying to. I think they were still trying to kind of recover from some of the punk roots and that flash of fandom that they received from License to Ill. You know, they were like, we need to do something a little different, and so they did. And this record is certainly it's a fantastic recovery, even though that we just realized that in some cases for some people 30 years later.
And what was
that? Fantastic record, though.
3-minute rule. Was that the song where MCA says "sucking your mother's dick"? Was that? I mean, there you go. There you go. Yeah, people come up to me and they try to talk shit. Man, I was making records when you were sucking your mother's dick. I mean, there you go. There you go. That's a couplet that you'll never forget.
No.
But you know, we're talking about a hip hop album with psychedelic influences and the Sgt. Pepper's. I don't think there could be a more perfect segue to another major hip hop release of that year.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising, which,
God.
I mean, you talk about a great album. You talk about an album that just like changed the rules early on about what hip hop could be. I mean, here you go.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys were sampling Sesame Street records. They had sampling the Turtles, sampling all, you know, all these 50s doo-wop songs and 60s psychedelia. I mean, they you know, they made something that was so unique and so much fun. It was like almost like a childlike way to make a hip hop album. You know, you had songs like Me, Myself, and I. Then you had The Magic Number, a little bit of Soap. and just the weird kind of mythos that they would do, like talking about, was it True Goy needs a haircut? I mean, just such weird, random stuff. Posthumous needs another haircut. I mean, just really weird, but so much fun, and that kind of showed
Right.
a different side of hip hop that other groups would definitely whether it was PM Dawn or Tribe Called Quest, very influential on those groups as far as their style.
Yeah, because this is a great era right here where besides the creativity and being able to sample like the Beastie Boys did, but being the original content and having that sort of jazz influence, because there's a lot of that going on, and De La Soul I think was really at the forefront of that. Tribe Called Quest might be a close second, but those guys, you want to talk about real cool and smooth records. There's barely any others that would fit in that category. Tribe had some of the closest, but 3 Feet High and Rising is that's such a major record.
And I mean, has anybody else ever sampled Steely Dan on a hip hop album? I don't think so. I mean, these guys, they were just like, we're doing our own thing. I
got to tell you, I think if there was only one band that it would have been Tribe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would have been it, And I've gone through my flashes over the last, because I got to tell you, whenever I get on an airplane, I listen to Tribe Called Quest. I don't know what it is, but there's something about hitting that, and I need to put 3 Feet High and Rising on that rotation whenever I get on the plane, just because I love that sound. There's something about jet life
mm-hmm.
and that smooth, hip hop sound that happens, and I feel bad for not including them. But man, yeah.
I mean,
I think you may be right though. Steely Dan, that could have been it.
Yeah, that was for that song "I Know," which is a take on the "I Know You, I Love You Better" from Peg by Steely Dan. I mean, then you have like things like "Jennifer Taught Me," "Darwin's Revenge," "Ghetto Thing," "Potholes in My Lawn," "Plug Tunin',"
"Potholes in My Lawn." I
mean, it's all great stuff, and it was so influential and so unique that it was. I'm reading here, it was actually selected by the Library of Congress as a 2010 addition to the National Recording Registry for being culturally significant. So that tells you, that we're talking about how the Cult were just unafraid to change from album to album. De La Soul really, they kind of abandoned all this stuff for De La Soul is Dead for their second album, which is a really weird album. And I think it actually has a lot of good stuff on there, but it definitely isn't as good as this. But I mean, they weren't afraid to shake things up. Even
no, they were not.
But yeah, huge.
And I was just going to say real quick that the hip hop community was so, everybody was trying so hard, there was a lot of competition, and so I think they wanted to be part of what was happening on the charts, and so being able to move around just as freely as De La Soul could. Public Enemy couldn't. Public Enemy had one sound, and there's nothing wrong with that because they did that sound, pitch perfectly. They did. But De La Soul gave themselves enough room to make things happen, and so being able to do what they did, gosh, they were so good. I need to go back and listen to more De La Soul, man.
And I think
good memories, man.
Yeah, great memories. I remember driving around I had that cassette. I wore that cassette out until actually the tape snapped, and then I bought it on CD because I played it that much. But a good transition from that. We're talking about a new band at the time. embarking on 60s psychedelia and 70s soul. There was another urban artist that year that made quite a splash. His name was Lenny Kravitz, and you listed his album "Let Love Rule" on your picks. So why don't we delve into that?
Man, I got to tell you, man, Lenny Kravitz for me. I mean, look, going back and hearing some artists that would kind of do the throwback to the 60s and 70s soul or the psychedelic stuff, you could find those all over the place. But whenever I heard "Let Love Rule," or actually, I think the first song I heard from him was "Mr. Cab Driver," and there was something going on in that song, with that social consciousness.
Yep.
About being discriminated as a young black man with dreads. But there was a lot of I felt like there was a lot of story being told in his songs, and that's what I really liked about Lenny Kravitz. It was not just the songwriting ability. I felt like there were stories going on there, personal moments that he was putting in, and being able to say "Let Love Rule" is a pretty generic term, a pretty generic way to go through it. But I got to tell you that record for me was such a highlight of 1989.
That's great.
I loved that record, loved it, and loved how it incorporated kind of what some of the hip hop guys were doing with being able to bring dialogue to the table on their experiences, but he brought it in a way that was so different. I'm trying to think of something else that was on there. Does anybody out there even care? That was another one. "Sitting on Top of the World." Of course, "Let Love Rule." "I Build This Garden for Us." I mean, there's a lot of love in this record. There's a lot of, hey, let's talk about this. It's not confrontational at all. It is just, hey, let's be able to sit down and work through it all together. And I really liked the dialogue that Lenny Kravitz was starting with this album. It's still a record that I fall back on, thinking about 30 years ago. Wow.
Well, see, you're talking about how you want to dive back into De La Soul. What you're making me feel is diving back into this album, because it was album I listened to a lot back then, but I've kind of forgotten about. But yeah, every track, I mean, even the bonus tracks, "Flower Child," great.
Yeah, "Flower Child." Yeah.
Rosemary. And it's worth mentioning that Lenny Kravitz didn't come out he had a very interesting kind of introduction. First off, he came from a showbiz background. He was half Jewish, half black. His dad was a TV producer, if I recall, or maybe a music producer. But his mom she was on the Jeffersons. She was a character on the Jeffersons.
Oh, on the Jeffersons, right?
Yeah. And she played the wife of the Jeffersons' neighbors, and so he kind of came from that. He started dating Lisa Bonet, and he used to call himself Romeo Blue. Do you remember that? Before he came back to Lenny, he was Romeo Blue, and they were like, "Who is this guy?" He was like seen around with Lisa Bonet everywhere, and Bill Cosby didn't want him on the set and all this kind of stuff. He was just kind of like this bad influence, and then he comes out and you're like, okay, this guy's got some things to say. And, "Let Love Rule" is it's definitely a 60s throwback, but it's a good one. I think for my money, I think he never did an album as good as this. He's had great hits here and there since then and great tracks, but nothing has been as consistent as this first album for my money.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something that's weird to me, we were talking about the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack a while ago, but there's a track, my favorite track off Let Love Rule is "B," which is kind of this like very 70s.
Oh, yes.
kind of chill. So, but
Yeah.
what's weird though is if you listen to the Pump Up the Volume soundtrack, there is a track called "Why Can't I Fall in Love" by Ivan Neville. If you play those songs, play those songs back to back, there's so many similarities, and I almost wonder if somebody maybe ripped off Lenny on that, because if you listen back to back, there's really, but of course, Lenny wasn't afraid of like stealing riffs here and there, but it's just interesting to hear the similarities. They're very similar compositions, but yeah. strong album.
It's a strong album. I will say that Mama Said, I know it's supposed to be a sophomore slump record. I guarantee you, I will talk about it the next time we let's see. I'm trying to think what year was Mama Said. That was
maybe
91.
Yeah,
Jeez.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was a great track.
I love that record. I love the Mama Said record. There was a lot of great stuff. On that one. But Let Love Rule, where it all begins for him, man. Go get it if you don't have it.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely solid. And I guess I don't have like a clear transition for this, but I guess since we're talking about since we've been talking about hip hop and soul and all that kind of thing, let's talk into one of the major fusion albums of 1989. And this was the year that The Real Thing came out by Faith No More. And
oh yeah. And
The Real Thing basically served as a platform to introduce the world to the band and Mike Patton, who it's interesting because it's so hard for so many bands to change singers. I mean, it can be done, but it's a rarity. But Faith No More had the luxury of getting a new singer before they really had made it big. They had a hit with "We Care a Lot" a few years back with Chuck Mosley, who I actually interviewed. I'm the last guy who interviewed him before he passed away, which is,
my gosh, are you really?
Which is crazy. I mean, I feel so fortunate to have talked to him because he was a really sweet guy, and it's just really, really sad. But he had his demons, and his reason he left the band was because he had his demons, and they couldn't work with him at the time, so they got Mike Patton. And The Real Thing came out like a shot in the arm. You're like, Epic was, if you had to name one song that was kind of indicative of that year, I mean, there's several, but if you did a top 10, let's say, Epic was definitely on that list for being so fresh at the time. I mean, now it sounds very dated, and rap rock, it happened before this. They did it with Run DMC and Aerosmith and all that, but Epic really kind of showed that it was this weird hodgepodge that could exist with alternative rock. Beastie Boys, you could say, did it too on License to Ill. But
true.
It also showed just what a weird band they are, because what I loved about The Real Thing is that Mike Patton, he had this very interesting idea of songwriting, which is instead of singing like "I Love You, Baby" and songs that were like, very heartfelt, he was like, no, I'm not about that. I just want to sing. But what I'm going to do is every song will be about like a little movie. It'll be from a different perspective. So you've got Edge of the World, which is about a child molester. It's really creepy. If you listen to it now, it's like, ugh. You got Underwater Love, which is about drowning somebody that you're obsessed with. You've got Surprise You're Dead, which is about being a vampire. You got Zombie Eaters, which is told from the perspective of an infant needing attention from their parents. It's a really cool approach to songwriting, I think. And I think Patton gets so much love for his vocal range because he's one of the best singers of our generation and of all time. His vocal range is unmatched. I mean, he's in that Chris Cornell camp, of just being so powerful, that I think his songwriting his lyrics get a little bit overlooked. And I think that he's a pretty cool lyricist. But all those tracks are awesome. The album opens up with "From Out of Nowhere," which is a great, great opening track. I mean, it just keeps you totally into the moment. Like these guys are in it for real. But they would go on to do so much better stuff. It's like Angel Dust to me was really, they really came into their own, because this first album, you have to get past the fact that for a guy with such a great voice, he was obsessed with keeping it to this like real nasally way. Everything he sings falling to pieces. It's really weird. And it was driving the producer crazy, because he's like, God damn it, Mike, you got this great vocal instrument. You sound like this like adenoidal twerp. Stop doing that. And Mike Patton, being the weirdo that he is, just kept doing it more just to annoy everybody. But even still, Epic was huge. Falling to Pieces was huge, but it's a really,
Yep.
it's just a good album. I mean, I think Faith No More were like one of my favorite bands of the 90s, but they really got their start in the late 80s. And, you know, it's just, the production is great. So many indelible images from that band. You think about the video, for the Epic video, you know, I mean, just that poor fish, that poor flopping fish.
No fish was harmed in this making of this video.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
And you know, and he listens.
Yeah, and it really is the mainstream introduction for this band. I mean, honestly, it almost took this record a year to, as they say, get legs.
Mm-hmm.
Almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time that Epic hits, you know, a few months later, after its release, they really didn't hit a stride. And then, of course, they were on some major tours to help them out even more. And of course, you're live. I've actually not been able to see them live at this point, which I need to take care of that.
Oh yeah, they're great live. They really are.
And especially now, since they have I mean, because, you know, with this album itself, it really is just it's just a hint into what the mind of Mike Patton is like. It really is. And, you know, the whole Real Thing record, that's just the bottom left hand little, you know, 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter part of it. You know, for me, he's been able to work with artists that I completely adore. And this record was just that first block into it, and then it just grew so much. You know, by the time that, you know, if you bring it up to even, you know, just today in 2019, he's been able to work with one of my favorite artists, John Zorn.
Mm-hmm.
He's worked with Buzz from the Melvins, with his Phantomus project,
Bjork. But
there's so much creativity going on that this was just a touch on it. And as genre bending, which is, you know, kind of, I guess, a theme really for them, because they all seemed like they were heavy metal guys, and they had that flash, but they could do the Commodores. I mean, think about them doing Easy.
And not just do them, but do it almost note for note perfectly.
Beautifully. I mean, to be as good almost as the original. You know, maybe some people will email you about that one.
Yeah, but I will agree with that. I say it's better.
Yeah.
For my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, being able to, and they're not doing those songs out of cheekiness or anything like that. They're doing them because they love those songs, and that's what I've always appreciated about Faith No More, the diversity that's going on as far as influence for them. It can be from Sly and Family Stone to Black Sabbath.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, they're just a strange band, you know. I mean, not many rock bands have a synth player. I mean, some do, but it's not super common. You know, that made them different. Roddy Bottum's keyboard is really good. Mike Borden is a monster of a drummer. I mean, he's worked with so many different people. He's played with Ozzy and everybody else. I mean, that guy's amazing. Jim Martin was the weirdo of the group. He never really quite got along with people, but his riffs are great. Billy Gould's bass playing, you know, and they often get lumped into the Chili Peppers, and Anthony Kiedis famously hates them. But I'm like, I'm sorry, dude. Mike Patton gets your rings around your ass, buddy. I'm sorry. If I got to pick between you and the Chili Peppers and Faith No More, I'm going Faith No More every time. I'm not even going to have to second guess it. So
yeah, me neither.
And they're more multidimensional than the Chili Peppers are. They just did more different things. They're just great. And the Real Thing's a great introduction. The title track is really awesome. I mean, just an epic 6-minute slog of just, you know, just shows you the range of, because that was actually the first single, was The Real Thing. That's the first one I remember, which is a weird single because it's so damn long, you know. It's it shows you how weird they are that they would go with that. And so, but Epic was of course the one that made them big, even though it was maybe the least representative of their sound, which is kind of crazy because they really, with Angel Dust, they totally moved away from that and did something totally different. And that's to me their best album, but they kept doing cool things. So yeah, The Real Thing.
Yeah.
Real thing is the real thing. What can you say? It is. It is great. Where should we go to next? Let's see. Well, why don't we? I mean, speaking of a band that kind of came out of nowhere, pun intended, that changed things. Why don't we move on to one that you picked, which is the Stone Roses, whose debut was massive.
Yeah, it was massive, and actually, I think we're pretty much just on the cusp of its 30-year anniversary. I think it came out in May. It was one of those bands that came out of that now infamously known Manchester scene,
mm-hmm.
where the mix between what was going on? I mean, so much. I mean, like R&B and just the R&B dance beat was going on, and
Happy Mondays.
Yeah,
Charlatans.
The sounds. Yeah, Charlatans, which they were a favorite of mine back then too. But if you really want to talk about an epicenter, the Stone Roses record is really just where it really starts. You know,
and a precursor to Britpop as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it really started to make the sound for what was to happen for everything that came out over the next. Gosh, I mean, I'm not sure if it's even stopped. Honestly, there's been so much that you cocould go back and. I think nowadays, if you have those new bands that are starting to come out of the UK, they'll go, this would be like their Nevermind almost.
Mm-hmm. It is.
You know, that they would go back and go, you know what? I heard "I Want to Be Adored,"
which is my
favorite
on
the radio when I was like
my 10. my favorite song by them.
And I knew that I wanted to do that. And I tell you what, I can't blame them, because that is a incredible song. It's subtle and so dynamic all at the same time, and
so dreamy sounding.
You know, there's really such little output from the Stone Roses, because I think they actually only did like 2 or 3 records.
Mm-hmm.
There was this one, Second Coming, and I'm trying to struggle with if there was another one.
I don't know if there was. If there was, it would have been on the recent reunion, which I don't think that they...
Yeah, well, I mean, somewhere between some of the comps that they put out, because their B-sides were really good as well. They could have been really counted as part of, part of this introduction to them. But you go back and you listen to this first album of theirs, and it's still such a highlight from the UK. Things started to turn again for them, moving out of their Beatlemania within a sense, and bring a little bit more of that underground 60s pop sound within a sense.
Fool's Gold, another major.
Fool's Gold, She Bangs the Drums, Waterfall, I Am the Resurrection, all of those. I mean, there's tons of singles off this record. I think there were only 12 tracks on it. It's almost like the Control, Janet Jackson's Control, where there were like eight singles off of a 10-track album or something like that. But there's so much on this that you can just eat up, love it. I'm trying to think if the B-side, there was a B-side called Sally Cinnamon, and I think it was on this session, but I can't remember if that was released
this is crazy
anniversary or something like that.
This is crazy. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for this album, and Fool's Gold wasn't even on the UK. It was only on the US release as a bonus track.
Yeah, it was only on the yes. Yeah,
which is nuts. That's one of their biggest hits.
Yeah. It was just a UK single, and by the time that it was released here, I think RCA Silvertone were distributors of it here in the States. It had already been around in the UK for darn near 4 or 5 months at that point, and by the time it picked up here, they'd already released Fool's Gold. And yeah, I mean, tremendous.
And then
absolutely just a great record. If you don't have it, go get it.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those albums that albums listen to for before you die kind of a thing. You gotta have Stone Roses in your collection if you're into the alternative rock and British music and all that kind of stuff. If you're an Anglophile, you need to have this one or at least check it out and get your take on it.
And let's be honest, it's the only Stone Roses record that you need.
Yep. I was looking at their discography too. They never came out with a third album. The second one was Second Coming, which was basically the second coming of Led Zeppelin. It was basically it was
that was a trash record.
Yeah, not that great. I still have that part.
It was not.
And remember in Shaun of the Dead where they were throwing albums at the zombies and they were like debating whether to throw Second Coming. One was like saying it was great, one was saying it wasn't. It was awesome, but yeah, definitely Stone Roses. Now I'm going to transition to another album from that same kind of scene. It's nowhere near as revered as Stone Roses, but I think at the time I think it was great, and that would be Jesus Jones' Liquidizer, which came out that year. And I think
I thought that just Go ahead.
I thought Liquidizer was a really solid record in my personal opinion, and it came out. It sounded very fresh. They were doing some really weird stuff. They had a lot of Public Enemy samples and definitely doing the very similar kind of Beastie Boys thing as far as all the different sounds. It was kind of industrial. It was kind of Manchester. It was kind of dance rock. The vocals were very unique. It was heavy, but it was very poppy at the same time. I think it was much more memorable and more interesting than EMF, which were kind of a contemporary of theirs and not nearly as good, although they were more popular. Yeah. But I thought Jesus Jones, I thought they were a good band, They haven't really held up over the years. You don't really hear much from them except if you listen on alternative rock radio. You'll hear Right Here, Right Now, which is like one of their weakest songs. But, I think Never Enough is great. Info Freako, there's all sorts of good stuff on that thing. They were also kind of in that same scene with Pop Will Eat Itself and the Wonder Stuff. That was another kind of little scene going on around that same time. So they were kind of involved with those guys. Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine. There's a whole weird thing, but I thought Jesus Jones, I thought they were a fun group, and even their second album, Doubt, was good. The third album, with that track, The Devil Perverse, that was, they had some good stuff. Now I think now they play Corporate Retreats and stuff. Something I read a while back, so their stars faded. I don't know if you have many thoughts on Jesus Jones Liquidizer, but I thought I'd just throw that in there as a fun album.
I will say I was like, Michael picked Liquidizer? I don't remember it being, because for me, it was Right Here, Right Now. And what was the other single?
It was Never Enough.
Never Enough, maybe. And I was like, do I need to go back and listen to that again? I mean, it's been like 30 years. It was all over. It was all over alternative radio. The Edge had already started around here at that point, and Right Here, Right Now was all over the place.
Yeah, and that was off.
It was such a huge hit, and I'm sure they played plenty of our Edge music fests. Those radio sponsored festival things. And this is a record that I feel like after you're lauding it, I need to go back and listen to, because I remember being a fan of Pop Will Eat Itself and actually Carter's Sex Machine. I kind of remember them, even though I couldn't tell you a song.
Ned's Atomic Dustbin, all those kind of groups.
Stuff. Yeah, all those kind of like, they were so mashed up. There were so many different things going on. Those UK bands were just silly.
There's so many of them.
They would incorporate so many different sounds, and just defy everything that was going on. And if Americans were doing that, they would just been laughed off and told that they were just a silly band and move on. But in the UK, you had the freedom to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at their description here on their All Music page, saying their genres: alternative dance, alternative rock, techno, industrial, dance punk, alternative hip hop. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff for one band to be associated with. You know,
that's a lot of stuff. Yeah, especially for 1989.
Mm-hmm. And
that's a burden. That's a burden, honestly.
Yeah, Judson got me into them, by the way. He was the one that introduced me to Jesus Jones.
Oh,
so.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
hey, Judson.
Yeah. Hey, Judson. Give you a shout out. Maybe listen to this now. Yeah. So no need to go into great detail about Jesus Jones, but I thought they were solid. I think they've kind of been unfairly forgotten. And yeah, they're a fun album. If you like dance, alternative rock, and some industrial and some hip hop influences, you could do a lot worse than checking out Liquidizer.
That's probably true.
But
you know what? You know what I think we should go to next, and this is going to put it on you again, though. Is from this side of it. Let's flip on the dark side and go to Nine Inch Nails' "Pretty Hate Machine." We
were in sync on that. I was
perfectly.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, let's Nine Inch Nails. Pretty Hate Machine. They came out of nowhere, or should I say, Trent Reznor came out of nowhere with this album that was so fully formed and so. I mean, basically, what Trent Reznor did was take the template of like Ministry and Skinny Puppy, all these bands that were very just awesome groups, but they were kind of hard to. There was never going to be I mean, Ministry had some mainstream success, but they were never going to be like a huge band because they were just so aggressive. And, you know, not a whole lot of melody. Reznor found a way to like mix like stuff like Prince and Jane's Addiction kind of styles with industrial. And he made something very unique. I mean, Head Like a Hole, nothing sounded like it at the time. He had the sense of drama. I mean, a track like Something I Can Never Have is just one of the best breakup songs of all time. It's just so just the mood of it. And it also shows you that he can do melody. You know, he's not all about just the aggression. You have Terrible Lie, Down in It. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I think Pretty Hate Machine was kind of in the same boat as The Real Thing, in that it came out and didn't get a lot of exposure really until they played on Lollapalooza. And once they did that, it kind of had this like second life where it kind of came back stronger in 1991. Than it did in 1990, 89, although I remember when my friends got me into it the summer of 89, I'm like, these guys are great. And I was, you know, I had no idea it was like a one-man show, although I am so glad that they did that remaster a few years ago, because the problem I had with Pretty Hate Machine after you listen to Broken or The Fragile or Downward Spiral was that it sounded so thin by comparison. You really had to crank it up and barely hear it. Now they added bass and it sounds really good. You can crank it up loud. And they did a really good remaster. If you haven't heard that, I recommend everybody to do that. It's a much stronger thing. I think there's some production issues. I know Trent Reznor hated his label, and there was fighting over some stuff to get the master track. But anyways, did a great remaster. But I mean, what else can you say? I mean, those guys, you know, it was the way he was able to make it kind of poppy, but still have a hard edge. Like a perfect example of that is like Sin is a great example of how he could make something that was so hooky, so catchy, but yet still really hard, you know?
Right.
And, you know, it kind of introduced the world to Trent Reznor and what a singular talent he was. He had this very strange, you know, nasal voice. He came out of Idaho or Iowa or someplace
Iowa.
Or Pennsylvania.
He was I'm trying to think, Ohio, wasn't he?
Ohio, that's it. So he came out of the Midwest. You know, he wasn't like some, you know, Chicago wax tracks dude. He wasn't somebody from the UK. He came out of, you know, the Midwest, and he just did his own thing. And, you know, he became one of the biggest ambassadors and icons of the 90s. But it all started in '89.
He's from Pennsylvania, by the way.
Pennsylvania. Okay.
My bad.
So.
My bad.
I think he was in Ohio. I think he moved. We'll get to the bottom of this one these days. But
one day we will.
But he also
yeah. Well, go ahead. Go
No,
ahead.
no, no,
Finish your
no,
thought,
no,
please.
no, no. You go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say this is such a singularly um, incredible record for the fact that it took that and once again that bleak sound of industrial and crossed it over to a mainstream crowd. Now it's another one of those records. I think that it didn't really hit for another year. That was, that's a theme that you can go along with a lot of these records. Like the Faith No More's Real Thing album. But it takes a little while for it to get a little bit of traction and get to the right people that are just, they're looking and thirsting for something different. They're looking for something that sounds fresh, and this certainly was to them because they hadn't been able to find something like Ministry on in their local record shops, or it was in such limited ways of being able to access it. So I know that he played here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area darn near 3 or 4 times just on that record for at least a year and a half, at least in that span. But that record was tremendously huge here. It was a bestseller in every single year that I was peddling records to kids. There was somebody new. There was a 14-year-old that would find out about Pretty Hate Machine and eat it up. There were 20-somethings that were coming back and getting their second or third copy because they lost the other one, or they just scratched the heck out of it. It's that record. It was like Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, and I think,
I mean, that's the only way that I can put it, is that it was like a Dark Side of the Moon, where you bought it multiple times, where the same person had to buy it so many different times because, of course they didn't take care of their CD or whatever it was, or their cassette or what have you. But in some cases they were just, here, take it. That's yours. I'll go get another one.
mm-hmm.
And just gifting it to friends that were just like, oh my gosh, it was such a fresh sound. Such a fresh sound. I saw them once on the tour. They opened up for Peter Murphy in 1990, I believe, for Deep. And it was, it should have been a co-headlining tour because 40-something minutes was not nearly enough for them at that point. It was just such a abrasive, wonderful show.
And I think too, I mean, it has to be said, I think for bang for your buck, Nine Inch Nails still put on one of the best concerts of any group that I know. I mean, I've seen them 5 times. They always bring it. His production, his production is always,
value is so high now.
He spares no expense. The sound is always great. And another, of course, I think we were talking about how Chris Cornell and Mike Patton kind of hide their feelings in their lyrics and did some things that are unorthodox. What makes Nine Inch Nails so interesting is that there was no metaphor. There was no. It was just like it was just naked, and and he got
on his sleeve.
Yeah, and it just like, this sucks, I'm in pain. Yeah. I mean, it was just, and I think that's another reason, just as important as their sound was, the reason that goths, flocked to him like and crazy is because of those lyrics. It really made him relatable. And that was a deep, a big part of his thing. And I guess since you mentioned the Peter Murphy tour, I guess we just go and detour into Deep, which was
why not?
Another big
great record, man.
Another big album. And this was, just as the Cult became household names with Sonic Temple, Peter Murphy went from this very obscure roots in Bauhaus to it having one of the longest hits ever. What was the show? It wasn't MTV Live. It was MTV. Oh, they had this afternoon
Oh,
show where it was like, and it was there for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks with Cut You Up. Cuts You Up was like a major hit, absolutely major hit.
man,
I mean,
you know what? I don't remember the show. Um,
yeah,
was it Total Request Live?
it was something like
It couldn't
that.
have been that,
It
was
was
it?
it was something like that, but it wasn't called that. It may have been like a rock. I forget what it was, but all I know is that Cuts You Up was like number one for like weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks.
Weeks.
And,
Yeah.
I'll look it up in a second. But I mean, Deep is, that's another album that shows you how far the goth scene had transformed. Like the cult went from to arena rock, and Peter Murphy went from this very obscure. I mean, I don't know how you would even classify Deep. Really, it's still goth. I mean, but it had such a
Yeah.
big sound to it. Um,
Yeah. It's artistic. Yet I think if you had, and I don't think he ever played arenas or anything like that. Um, but he was mainly playing small. Like here, I saw that tour at the Arcadia,
Great. Oh, I love that.
which
I
is
love the
a
place.
small 2,000 something seater. Um, but it was a pretty. It was a he could have filled it up. He could have filled it up with the sound that he had for sure. Deep is there's a lot of nuance to it. You know, it's one of those records that whenever you listen to it with your earbuds or headphones or whatever it is that you use, you hear some things that you don't hear whenever you listen to it just in the car.
Yeah, Peter Walsh's production
There's
is really great.
Yeah, it's impeccable.
I mean, just on Marlene Dietrich's favorite poem alone, I mean, all the layers of like harp and guitar, and I mean, that's
Yeah,
just such a fantastic song. Maybe one of his best. Shy, great. Seven Veils, A Line Between the Devil's Teeth and That Which Cannot Be Repeat, which was just,
right.
which of all the songs, that's definitely the most like Bauhaus. It even has like kind of the same cadence
That's very.
as in the Flat Fields. It's a very similar cadence between those two songs. If you check it out. But then it's got, Cuts You Up, and A Strange Kind of Love is a really a strong contender for the second best ballad off that album. It's very just, melodic and almost has kind of like a Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven kind of feel to it in many ways.
Yeah.
It's just solid. It still sounds great. His voice, of course, is I saw him a couple months ago.
It may be at its peak right here.
It really is, because I saw him a couple months ago play the Paramount. He's doing all the Bauhaus stuff. He still sounds great, but
Oh right, yeah, yeah.
but this one, man, he just was nailing it. I mean, it Cuts You Up is still, it's so funny because like if I ever put my iPod on like shuffle, no matter what playlist I pick, I always get two tracks that show up. It's always Echo and the Bunny and Lips Like Sugar and Cuts You Up. Those two are in every single playlist I ever do. I ever do the Genius. It always pop up. It's like those two are just like, you must listen to these two songs, and Cuts You Up is great. I mean, it's just it's just
Yeah.
And that's another song. If you've had the top 10 songs of 1989 that stick in your memory, It Cuts You Up was major.
Cut You Up is there.
And it's just
Certainly is, man.
super
Certainly is.
super moody, just really 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 strong. So hats off to Peter Murphy's Deep. Where shall we go to next?
Mine is a terrible thing to taste.
Yeah, we might as well talking about Nine Inch Nails.
Getting into Nails and Peter Murphy and just what was going on back then.
Yeah, Ministry really.
Mine is a terrible thing to taste. Yeah, this was a big transitional record.
Yeah, it really showed how Ministry was going to a heavy direction, which began, of course, when they went from the With Sympathy Days, and they went to Twitch, and then of course Land of Rape and Honey, which we discussed last year, which is a major sea change record, just showing the collision of metal and industrial, and then on Terrible Thing to Taste it's even more so metal. I mean, this was really like they refined their sound.
Yeah,
and it's just it's just solid. I mean, it's like what I love about Ministry is just the groove and the unrelenting just unrelenting groove that just will not let up, no matter just opening up with Thieves. I mean, Thieves is such a great such a great track with that
Oh my God.
that riff
Yeah.
and those like power drill samples. It's just like
Yeah.
uh, it's just so heavy. I just
it, it it's like they decided to go ahead and say, you know what? Screw it. Let's just keep on it.
yeah.
Let's keep that abrasive, in your face. Let's keep doing this. And now we have, you know, Alien Jurgensen with 90 piercings on his face.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really the transitional. And whenever I say transitional, I think for them, it's not transitional to us really, but for what people heard, you know, because they were like, holy crap, because nobody heard Stigmata. Let's be real. you
Mm-hmm.
know, they, unless you tuned in to 120 minutes, you didn't really hear Stigmata
Yeah, that was.
because it was not on the radio.
Yeah,
But
that was.
whenever you get into, I think what translated on this record foremost was they were heavy and melodic and in your face, and they were not letting go. They were just gonna take their claws and sink them into you, and just make sure that you knew that they were there. That was this record.
And it just showed that the one thing that Ministry have is this overall sense of tension and like and just ominousness, and just from the opening like siren call on Burning Inside, just you just know it's like this is getting dark, this is getting creepy. It's just that slamming riff, and then you go from that to Never Believe, which has got Chris Connolly on vocals and adds a different element to the sound, and then Breathe, which is another great one. And then my personal favorite is So What, which is just this, this super long track of like this weird, like you hear this like, it's like it's from like I think it's from an Ed Wood movie. All that Kill for a Thrill stuff, those little samples, and the ha 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 ha, and all those and all these weird little samples over this bass and a drum percussion track, very similar to Bela Lugosi's Dead, that kind of and it just lulls into this trance with the bass. All of a sudden, it comes back with that na 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 na. Just that riff is just it's so good, And there's a few tracks on there that aren't as memorable, like Test or Dream Song, which is more kind of like atmospheric stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's got some of their best tracks, and it really showed you kind of where they were heading, which of course is for Psalm 69, which is their heaviest album,
right,
at the time. But yeah, I mean, Thieves Burning Inside, Breathe, and So What. I mean, that's basically all you need to know from that album, and it's all fantastic. Just show me that dance and metal can coexist and sound incredible together. That's what I took from that for sure. So yes, hats off to that. And I guess one that we could kind of move towards the transition is one you pick for another The album, for Mind Bomb.
Right. Yeah, Mind Bomb. The had been on my radar for a while. I mean, between Soul Mighty and Infected, which is I believe Infected was the album before this one. Just solid efforts out of Matt Johnson. I mean, he was a singular guy that was bringing together musicians to create his vision. But Mind Bomb was so different for him, I really think, because not only did he give, it always seemed like he just gave himself credit within a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But on this album, he was able to get the talent of the one Johnny Marr. And, I guess at that point, the Smiths' demise had happened 2 or 3 years earlier, at least 2 years earlier, it seemed. But he was able to snag his talents, and that record is such a dark record underneath. There's really just very, very little, and once again, I've said this several times, there's a lot of bleakness to the record. There's a lot of not much hope going on there. I mean, Armageddon days are here again. Think about that for a minute. You know,
was that the song with the line, "If Jesus Christ came back today, he'd be gunned down by the CIA"? Is that?
I believe. Oh gosh, that may have been.
That's one of the.
I'm trying to remember it.
That's one of the most amazing lyrics I've heard. And I just never. I just
right. Yeah. It really. I think you're right. I think it is. But the album itself sounds so just nonchalant about the end of times, about the end of a relationship, about, the end of anything, whether it's your last day on a job or this is your last day in your house and you're moving to somewhere different. I mean, it really it's a closure record, if you ask me. There's a lot of stuff going on this record that is just so sad, but at the same time seeming so hopeful for hopefully something great's going to happen to me next.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, hopefully something good is going to happen next. And he touched on all the, of course he touched, Matt Johnson was known for touching on, especially at this point, which, for music at the time was pretty high, but he talked about politics, religion, and personal relationships, and all of that was on this record. All of it. Nothing was off the table for him. Nothing at all. And it's such a wonderful record. I still love this album. And I should also note, Sinead O'Connor makes a couple of appearances, I believe.
Oh, that's right.
I think it was a couple.
Yeah, that it was.
She does some backup vocal, which maybe it's only the one song, that Kingdom of Rain. That's the only one I could think of off the top of my head. So that may be right.
Because they did one later on his next album, I think. But yeah, that was one that was really, really pretty. I mean, and I think the just we discussed this when we discussed albums from 1993, but that's just a really underrated act. It's just very unique. The guy's got a great soulful voice, mixes a lot of different genres together, and obviously a cult favorite. But maybe because of his weird name, it didn't catch on. His fact that name, you either love it or you hate it. I know some people are just like, "What does that mean? The it's very strange." But a really solid. Solid album.
There's just not a lot of output from him either. At this point,
he's. I think he's coming out with something new, but it's taken him a long time.
You know what? There was a record that he was supposed to do that was supposed to be a bunch of Hank Williams covers.
Mm-hmm.
No, wait. Did that come out?
Yeah, I think
Hanky.
Yeah.
Did that finally come out?
I think it did.
There were a couple records that were rumored, and they've never come out. So I don't know if he's so overtly. I don't know. Matt Johnson is a strange animal, and I appreciate his art a lot. This Mind Bomb, of course, his follow up, I believe it was called Lust. No, Dusk.
Dusk. Yes, Dusk. That was 19.
Dogs of Lust was the main single off that. But Dusk was a great record. But honestly, after that, what you're getting is just stuff. I think that may have been whenever he finally released Hanky Panky, but to not so much fanfare because it was so long gone.
He kind of just faded from view.
He's a strange animal.
He is.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what's going on with that fella, but Mind Bomb should be noted as one of the best albums of 1989 for for his songwriting, his content, all of it. It's just really a good record. It really puts 1989 in a nice alternative capsule.
Absolutely. And one thing that made this so frustrating for me is that there's so many albums that be impossible to cover. So we have a couple of shout outs before we go further. You've got Love and Rocket self-titled album. You've got New Order's Technique. Yeah. You've got Erasure's Wild. You got Red Hot Chili Peppers' Mother's Milk. You've got...
And all of these are great records.
Yeah.
All of them are really good records.
Yeah, but...
all of them are.
Replacements Don't Tell a Soul, B-52's Cosmic Thing. It's a crazy... albums came out this year, and we just can't get to it all because we kind of are our personal favorites, and some we have to say more than others. But I just want to give a shout out to some of those, and do a detour for something that you may expect for someone like me, who's a Love and Rockets fan, to do, or a New Order, which I love. But I'm going to go kind of an odd direction and choose Tin Machine. 1989, David Bowie said he's loves the Pixies. He loves all this, Sonic Youth and Glenn Branca, and he's like, I'm going to do my version of that. And he got the two sons of Soupy Sales, Hunt and Tony Sales, and the guitar powerhouse that is Reeves Gabriels, who's an amazing guitar player.
Reeves Gabriel.
And they did Tin Machine. The album came out. It got bad reviews. Fuck all those people. Tin Machine is a great album. I'll defend it to my dying day. I think it's great. I thought Tin Machine was so cool. Hearing Bowie in this really aggressive framework with songs like, Under the God and I Can't Read, the title track.
I will stand with you on this record.
It's great. It's great. And there's a bleakness to it. I love it.
I loved the initial Tin Machine record, the very first one. Now the second one we might have to arm wrestle on.
Yeah, second one was I don't have any.
The second one was fairly a weak follow up, but the first record, really with David Bowie, man, it takes a lot for me to tell you that there's poor David Bowie, because David Bowie's one of my number ones, like all-time number ones.
No, me too.
And for me even to say to Tin Machine 2, I hope that he's still smiling on me because I like the rest of this stuff and not Tin Machine 2. But Tin Machine, this first Tin Machine record I love it too, man. I love that record. I feel terrible for not going to see it because I was trying to play cool guy and dismiss it just like everybody else, but now I feel like such a freaking heel for not taking an opportunity to see David Bowie.
Yeah,
see David Bowie whenever you can see David Bowie, period. That's all there is to it.
Heaven's in Here. What was that song? A Prisoner of Love. There's so many.
Prisoner of Love, yeah.
So many good tracks, In many ways, Tin Machine kind of suffered the same fate as Iggy Pop's Instinct a year before, where two of these, major icons kind of went hard rock. But I think where Iggy went more kind of like in a Billy Idol cult kind of direction, Bowie went into very garage rock, Sonic Youth, Live Skull kind of direction. But I think it really works. I think time is proving, I think it's going to, it'll get its audience. It's still, it'll smile better on that one. Mm-hmm. So I think Tin Machine's a really good album. I thought it was really solid. I'm just going to kind of transition to a few others here. I wanted to talk about Floating in the Night, by Julie Cruz,
the Julie Cruz, yeah,
which I thought was a fantastic album. This was right at the height of it came out before Twin Peaks, a year before Twin Peaks came out, but when Twin Peaks came out, it used the song Falling as the theme.
Yeah.
And it really
iconic.
It really set the tone for that. The music was all written by Angela Badalamenti and David Lynch. They basically were like the Phil Spector team for Julie Cruz, because I read an arc where she's originally like this big kind of show tunes Broadway kind of singer. And they totally transformed her into this real dream pop chanteuse, very ethereal. just such a smooth,
Yeah.
clean voice, and the whole album. I mean,
She was doing Broadway before that. I didn't know that.
Something
Wow.
like that. I don't think she was actually playing, but she was doing like musical theater basically. I mean, she had like a big brassy voice, and they were like, no, we're going to go in a different direction here and do this industrial symphony, and he just had, you know, Floating, the title track, just so many, The World Spins, The Nightingale, and many of these songs were used on Twin Peaks, not just Falling. So that Twin Peaks has really made Julie Cruz kind of a thing, and it kind of worked hand in hand with making Twin Peaks a thing. I know that she got really pissed off at David Lynch on the return for not using her stuff very much, which is kind of sour grapes on what happened there. But you know, there was a great sound, and I think that '89 had a lot of really good kind of stuff like that, really kind of atmospheric albums, which is why I also want to touch briefly on Hats by Blue Nile, the Blue Nile.
Right.
And that's one of those.
And I'm looking for education from you, because this was a record that I initially dismissed, and it's been in my crook for the last couple of weeks, because I remember reading something somewhere, might have been Pitchfork or something like that, about they had something on Blue Nile hats, and I thought, why are they talking about Blue Nile hats? So please,
yeah,
give me knowledge. Give me knowledge.
Well, this was the weird thing about the Blue Nile, is that it came out in '89, right? This up came in '89, but I did not hear it until almost 3 years later, when a friend of mine from high school was like, "Man, have you heard Blue Nile?" I'm like, No, I'm not really into. I don't really know much about them. I saw the album cover. I didn't. He's like, "No, man." He's like, you like Brian Ferry, right? He's like, "Yeah, if you like that, you gotta check out Blue Nile." So I found it used at a CD store, and it was right. It was like immediately I was kind of taken into it. It's just a very, very atmospheric, very romantic. The guy's vocals have a really cool sound to it. It's everything's like kind of languorous and chilled out and kind of dreamy, and it's all relationship based. There's like "Let's Go Out Tonight," "Saturday Night," 7 a.m. It just feels like a very like kind of a homey record, kind of like "We're gonna hang out tonight" kind of a thing. The Downtown Lights, Headlights on the Parade, and that's one of those albums too that I think came out and didn't really sell a lot of copies, but had a lot of influence, because right. I mean, I know Annie Lennox has covered one of their songs, The Downtown Lights, and and Rod Stewart covered the same song as well on one of his albums. So
okay.
So yeah, it's just one of those kind of singular sounds that they just had this very slick, they just had a very unique. It's one of those bands that's really hard for me to describe, because they were so just in this own world. I mean, Roxy Music is as close as I can kind of come to describe it, but
I was going to say, does it fit in that like sort of new romantic period within a sense? I mean, towards the tail end of that.
Kind of. I know it's often kind of labeled as sophistopop. I guess that's kind of the genre it gets kind of lumped into, which is like the Walker Brothers kind of stuff, or Sade, Style Cancel, Simply Red, all that kind of stuff. But I it's really good if you like that kind of slick style. I highly recommend it. Definitely a good.
Excellent. Okay, I'm intrigued, and will seek out that record.
So just for fun, let's do a complete 180 and go to one of your tracks, which was Godflesh's 1989 release. Let's go. This
may have been a better segue earlier.
yeah, but let's double back around. Let's go from Blue Nile to Godflesh.
Godflesh, boy, I tell you what. If you want to talk about one of those records that it captures you by its cover, Godflesh is one of those records. It was kind of up there in where, like in the mid 80s, where it was an Iron Maiden record with Number of the Beast and the and the Eddie that was playing puppet with their little demons, Satans, or whatever it was. I tell you what, being seen at that point, this row of people on crucifixes that were on fire for street cleaner, and I'm not trying to sound anti-religious, but you want to talk about like something that captures your eye. They certainly did that with that one, and at the time I was unaware of much in what was going on, because once again we're talking about a UK phenomenon at this point. We're talking about what's going to lead up into what's known as more of the grindcore sort of era,
mm-hmm.
or sound. But there was this little label out of the UK called Earache, and they had this band called Godflesh, and they had a handful of bands on their roster at this time, and Godflesh was the first one that really captured my attention, even though it probably should have been Napalm Death with, one of their Scum or something like that. But whenever I picked up Godflesh's Street Cleaner, it floored me. It floored me completely. It was a complete hallmark of, it was industrial, but it was different and it was new. It wasn't Ministry.
No.
It wasn't American. It was not American at all. It was completely, I mean, there was no hope. And once again, bleak,
mm-hmm.
which is my theme for today.
Yeah.
There was zero hope. You had no chance of survival at all. Period. The record was going to decimate you. Absolutely. There was no doubt about it. And there was no way out. There was no way out whatsoever. And Godflesh, while they incorporated the industrial sounds and things that were familiar, but at the same time it was so, it sounded so fresh. It wasn't American industrial at all. It was not. It was not, because still at this time, let's refresh back to the melodicism of what was going on with All Mine Is a Terrible Thing to Taste. Because let's be real, that there was a lot of melody going on there, as abrasive as it was.
And Nine Inch Nails, of course.
Godflesh, and Nine Inch Nails. But Godflesh was not.
They're nothing.
Godflesh was Psycho Candy gone psycho.
Mm-hmm.
Is what it was.
It was just like a hellscape.
It was the end of the road. That was it. And born out of the mind of Justin Broderick, who would go on and be part of like Nail Bomb later, Yesu.
Yesu's great.
Yeah, Yesu's fantastic. He's so talented. Justin Broderick is.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's sickening almost that he keeps his own aesthetic, and at the same time he can be so diverse in the way he approaches every single sound. And the Godflesh to me is actually one of my favorite records of that year, just because I'd been a metal kid for so long. It was nice to feel metal in that kind of way. That was still current, It was a different sound, and at the same time still kept with the aggressiveness and darkness that I craved. Even though it wasn't really aggressive sound wise, it was just aggressive in its because it wasn't fast.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't Slayer or anything like that. But man, the record still stands up to me today. It really does.
And I just want
to. I should have bought the Splattered record. they had an anniversary record that they released, and I should have bought it because it just means so much to me. But I passed.
I also want to say that I've discussed how I feel like Killing Joke is a band that still gets heavier as they get going. They have not mellowed with age at all. And I feel that Godflesh is still very similar to that. I think Godflesh is still doing really great stuff.
Oh yeah.
I mean, A World Lit Only by Fire came out in 2014 is a fantastic, just an amazingly dark and bleak record. And then Post Self, which came out a couple years ago, was also really another amazing album.
Oh yeah.
He's still killing it. He's still doing some really, really, really great stuff. So yeah, Godflesh, or I got in later I didn't get into Godflesh until like Selfless into the 90s, so I was kind of a latecomer, but definitely respect their stuff and yeah. I mean,
yes, absolutely. Justin Broderick is a UK version of Alan Jurgensen or
mm-hmm.
or whatever you want to call him,
mm-hmm.
without the piercings and all that and all that great stuff. But he certainly is. He's so diverse in being able to incorporate. He can do it all, man. He can do it all. Period.
And makes it sound so big, I mean, he can make this mountain of sound out of just a guitar with light strings and distortion. I mean, he plays very unorthodox instruments to get his sounds, but it just sounds cavernous, And I'm gonna do a weird transition here because you mentioned crucifixes from a Street Cleaner, so I'm gonna do a very odd transition, but using that as my guide. Let's discuss. Let's discuss a really great album that really you don't hear about much anymore because it was kind of off the beaten path because it was a soundtrack, and that's Peter Gabriel's Passion. This was the soundtrack to Martin Scorsese's very controversial The Passion of the Christ, and for my money, is Peter Gabriel's best work. I know that's kind of controversial to say, but
wow!
But I think that Passion was a really cool soundtrack. And it's one of those albums that you don't even need to like the Scorsese movie to appreciate. It's just a strong piece of work on its own. And I don't even think he sings a word on that album, does he? I think it's all instrumental.
No, he doesn't. No.
But
no, it is. Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of it that he's not really playing on it.
Yeah,
there's some parts where they're just sound recordings, where he does the sort of what's the guy that used to do the there's the American guy that went and did field recordings. Anyway, I'm not stealing your thunder here, but I agree wholeheartedly. This is a fantastic album.
It's just great.
Please proceed.
I mean, the atmospherics are off the charts. You got a very different song called Stigmata. You've got Sandstorm. It's all instrumentals. It's all very cinematic. Lazarus Rays of These Hope. Gethsemane. I mean, just really cool stuff. But the one that I always sticks out to me because I've seen it. One thing that all bands always like to do is they make their own mixtape before they take the stage. And they get you pumped up. They pick their songs that they like most of the time. And both Peter Gabriel and The Cult have both come out after The Feeling Begins, which is the very first track off the album. And it's got this.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's
wow.
And it's just got that great.
The Cult did that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for the '94 tour, that was their opening track, and I've seen Peter Gabriel did it. Peter Murphy did it for, I believe it was for his Holy Smoke tour. But
wow,
just that. It's so trance-like, and you get those like tribal drums, it makes you feel like there's something epic coming, which I know is why those bands used it. But I just think, you don't really hear much about it anymore because the Last Temptation of Christ was kind of like a
Right.
kind of lived and died in a very short time. The controversy didn't really make it. It was not one of Scorsese's most well regarded films. It's interesting, but
No.
but I just want to give a little quick shout out to that album because it's just really solid. And I also wanted to give a brief mention to the Ocean Blue, who
Oh yes.
they came out with an album in 1989. It was self-titled, if I'm correct. And the Ocean Blue were just really solid, new wave, basically. I mean, they were just a really great.
I love that record.
I
love that record.
It's all good. And, what's interesting about them is like Trent Reznor, they are from Pennsylvania, but if you didn't know any better, you think for sure they were from like the UK because they have that Echo and the Bunnymen sound so down pat. Whether it's Between Something and Nothing or Scarborough Fair, Drifting Falling. I mean, I read something a while ago. It was someone was talking about the Ocean Blue. It was on some blog, and they were saying the Ocean Blue is basically, if you think about the Ocean Blue, you think about walking around the fall in like 1989, chilled out on a chilly night. It's just very atmospheric, very reminiscent of the era. Just really good, solid synth pop. They never really were a huge band, but that album was,
they weren't.
And they kind of after this.
I did love that record a lot. That was on heavy rotation for me, just because I really liked that we had an American counterpart to the sound of like you said, the Echo and the Bunnymen, and it was so super melodic. And I'll be honest, I don't know the names of any of the guys in the band.
Me neither.
But it was so super. Those guys were so good, and I'd love to go. I'd love to go see them, and I never have. But I really did love that one and their second album, Cerulean.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those records are really, really, they're nice records. And that may sound pedestrian and what have you, but they were really nice records, and I'd love to be able to see those guys.
And the reason that I picked the album over 11 Rockets and A New Order's Technique, which were bigger records and just as something that I enjoy, I just think the Ocean Blue don't get their fair due. They're very underrated,
right.
And you'll never hear them on First Wave, which I find really annoying because they were.
Yeah, that is pretty annoying actually.
Because they were in the thick of it. They were all over the edge. They played them all the time, and and they're just. It's really good work. Maybe when they say I can interview one of those guys and see if they're still around, they want to do something. But I think that I'm a big Ocean Blue fan, and I wish they got more respect. They don't get enough respect.
Yeah,
in my personal
opinion. I agree
opinion.
with that. Hey, you know what? New Order was very well entrenched in whatever they put Round and Round and in any of those singles out off of Technique. Those are all great songs for sure. And same thing going with Love and Rockets. I think Love and Rockets was they hit a weird sense by having a hit song.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to hit with So Alive was not real, honestly.
Yeah.
That honestly for me was like, that's not real. That can't be happening.
And it's even weirder.
That cannot be happening.
That there was hardly any guitar in the song. It's almost like all bass and drums, which is kind of
right, exactly. And it. Don't get me wrong. It's a solid entry. That record is, but being able to hit on a different level for Love and Rockets, that really struck it really strange.
Mm-hmm.
I really didn't want. I wanted to keep my music for me.
Yeah, that was a selfish aspect that we all had back then.
And I'm not trying to be selfish. I'm just trying to. You can have your music over here with the Jets and Debbie Gibson and what have you in 1989, and I can have my music over here with The Cure and Love and Rockets. But you know what? Stuff like that has got to happen, and there you go.
Yeah, I think Sonic.
That's how it works.
Sonic Temple kind of hits in that spot with me too. Like the Cult weren't my band anymore. You know, they were opening up from a. I think did we discuss it last year?
Metallica?
Yeah, when I discussed it last year, we talked about Injustice for All when I was on that tour, and people were like throwing stuff at the Cult and everything, and like Ian lost it, and jumped in the So I've already gone into that, but yeah, that was a perfect example of two bands that should have toured together.
Well, and most famously around here is whenever the Melvins opened up for Nine Inch Nails on the Fragile tour, and they were throwing so much crap at the Melvins that the Melvins were like, "Fuck y'all."
Yeah, we'll do what we want.
They went total distortion for like the rest of their set.
You know,
like total distortion. Like they didn't play another song.
Yeah, like,
they just went total distortion for the rest of their time on the stage. And I believe, well, I mean, I don't want to say that this is it, but Colossus of Destiny, the Melvins, record is pretty much that kind of set. It's just a total feedback fest. Total feedback fest. That's all they did. So
something I should probably add back in when other edit artists keep it right here, but just talk about tour openers. I just wanted to mention, I forgot to say that at one point, Faith No More opened for Poison in support of The Real Thing.
Oh wow!
And they got thrown off the tour because Mike Patton got on stage and said, "Did you know Ricky Rocket likes to suck his own cock?" And they got kicked off the tour. That's glorious. That's glorious.
Oh, that's great.
That always makes me laugh. But
oh man, that's great.
But I guess if we're going to talk about bands that you kind of felt weren't necessarily your bands anymore, we need to discuss Depeche Mode's One on One.
Yeah, I put it on my list. Not so much that it's one of the best albums, but I still think that we need to recognize it as one of the best live albums, because it really does. It sums up a lot of what was, Depeche Mode was really starting to come into a mainstream focus. And where Music for the Masses was a tremendous record for them, not just sales-wise, and also on the charts.
Yeah, it really helped.
101 really helped them a lot, if you ask me.
It set the stage for the year that followed with Violator.
Yeah, it really set the stage for them over the next, until today. Honestly, if you want to be real about it, where they are, chart-topping artists now, whenever they release anything. With that record, I mean, of course, that was the show that had the big Pasadena show with OMD and Wire and Thomas Dolby. I actually was in Los Angeles. I think it was about 3 or 4 days later after the tour, after that show. And my aunt was awesome. We always stay with my aunt whenever we visited California, and she saved me they're sort of like weekly entertainment sections, and they were always so great because they would be really thick booklets of who was playing at what. It was an entertainment section for the week. And it would have shows that were playing at the Whiskey, that were playing at the Rainbow, that were playing at the Irvine Coliseum, or Pasadena, or whatever what was in an earshot of where they live in Rancho Palos Verdes. And so I don't think I still have it, but at one point I did have the big page ad to where it had Depeche Mode with the big Music for the Masses logo and all the bands that were playing there. And like I said, I remember it was OMD and Thomas Dolby and Wire played, which is, I know that was on our list for today for Ibtaba.
Yes.
It's beginning to and back again.
Yes.
But, that was, and mind you, I think that tour was for, oh gosh, maybe it was Ibtaba. I don't know. It may have been, but
yeah, all I really have to add for Ibtaba, and I'll let you get back to it, is just that has special significance for me because it was the first CD I ever bought. That was my very first
was it really?
CD, and
was it really?
And I didn't realize until years later that it's almost all live recordings. I had no idea because it's so smooth sounding.
Yeah.
So that's all I really wanted to add about Wire. It's a great band, of course, and we're not going to get derailed. But yes, Ibtaba holds a special place in my heart.
No. And I loved how Wire was. Well, of course, Wire was on Mute, which was on the same label as Depeche Mode. So they got their fair shake at it. But they're such a specific type sound band. They're not going to fit in with a lot of normal sorority or whatever Depeche Mode fans. But anyway, going back to 101, I think that show was such a incredible document for a band that was right there, that they had there was no other way for them to go anywhere but up. There was no way. You listen to 101 and the performance that they put on that show. If you didn't think that they were going to go anywhere but up on the charts, period. Even throw away the UK and the US, but they were going to be all over the place. I mean, Violator, of course, solidified where they were going to be, but they were going to be a force to be reckoned to in alternative music, and 101 was that document.
Yeah, it really showed too how they were like one of the few electronic bands that could get the same status as a rock band, and it's all because of Martin Gore's sense of like melodrama, the way he could construct tracks, and also, I mean, Dave Gahan was like the cheerleader. I mean, Dave Gahan has a great stage presence. I mean, he's like the ambassador for that type of music, and he proved that you could do it. You could be as big as a Bon Jovi or whoever out there just because they had the sound, they had the wide sound, they had the ambition. I mean, the Depeche Mode are so goddamn great. I mean, I can sing their praises all day long. They're one of my favorite bands, and I just think they're
And for me at that time, and maybe I'm being too nostalgic about it, but for me, it's a lot more. It's Alan Wilder. For Alan being part of the band at that point, you want to talk about a conductor. I mean, like Leonard Bernstein. He is for me the guy that pulled it together. For those next two tours, because I've been on edge with Depeche Mode, and I think I've been fairly vocal, at least on social media about what it's been like for me on the last couple of records from them, where I haven't been so pleased. But if Alan Wilder was part of this group now, which he hasn't been since Songs of Faith and Devotion, You know, I really think that this band would would be bigger than big at this point. And what they figured out is they don't need Alan. All they need to do is be Depeche Mode, and that's it. And so I have been vocable about my complicity on the band. I still love Depeche Mode, but I did kind of, within a sense, break up with them. But 101 is an absolute highlight of, for me, and of their careers. I think that you really can get better than that. If they had recorded Violator the way that they did 101, then that would have trumped it. But
it's also,
you know,
I also gotta say the documentary is so damn weird. The one that this is the soundtrack for.
oh yeah, it's strange.
Yeah, it's like I'm not really.
It really is. It's a weird one.
It's not a really compelling documentary, I don't think. But it's just it's weird. It's just a really strange. It's just like
it's a weird one.
It's just it's.
Hey, let's take radio winners, people that won on the radio, and take them on tour and film them.
Yeah,
great.
and directed by the guy that did Woodstock. I mean, it's just
right?
It's a weird ass movie, you know. And you know,
it really is.
And I guess if we're talking about movies and soundtracks, something I probably should have segued from Julie Cruz into, but I wasn't thinking. And I'll be real quick here because I know we got the big one to get to. But Chris Isaak's Heart-Shaped World came out in 1989.
Oh yeah.
Much like Julie Cruz's Into the Night, Heart-Shaped World was used extensively by David Lynch for A Wild at Heart.
Yeah.
A couple years later, where he used a Wicked Game for the Wild at Heart soundtrack, which of course has become a massive hit. It's been covered by so many different artists. It's a great song. I mean, it's just that weird wonky guitar line, and it's just it's epic. He also used Blue Spanish Sky. It was a lesser known song. But, Heart-Shaped World was just a really cool album because it would sound totally different than anything else that came out that year. It was completely different than anything that, in the next couple of years, because it was like straight out like 1955, you know what I mean? It was a very rockabilly influenced record to show Chris Isaak as just a really great vocalist. And I think it's got plenty of songs just as good as Wicked Game, but Wicked Game was like the one that Lynch knew was like, Lynch knows how to pick those songs. He just has a great musical taste. And he went with that. And it's a great track, so yeah, just a shout out to Heart-Shaped World. Did you want to touch?
Absolutely.
Do you want to touch on David Byrne's Ray Momo before we go to our mutual number one pick?
Yep. Real quick, I wanted to say I loved David Byrne's Ray Momo, and mainly because of at that point it was hard to find a mainstream artist like David Byrne to really inflect some cultural influence into his music. I mean, different cultures. And Ray Momo is such a fantastic record. It really is. It really opened up what David Byrne was going to do, especially with his Luca Bop album or his Luca Bop record label. And so, mind you, it has a lot of Cuban influence and or mariachi style or anything like that. But Ray Momo was really my introduction into his Luca Bop album or his record label, and it's culturally something that was significant for me. So I realized that there were other sounds in the American sound.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't aware of a lot. And Luca Bop has now such an incredible array of diversity in presentation on whether it's, South African, West African, Cuban, everything. You know, it's such a fantastic introduction into some of the variety of sound that you can find in our world. And Ray Moa was just that pinpoint record for me.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, Byrne kind of did what Peter Gabriel did, which is like expose, American audiences to world music, and that was
exactly.
So they both deserved a tip of the hat for that.
Yep.
All right, we're here for the big one.
Here it is.
There can be only one mutual pick for the best album of 1989, arguably, for my mind, one of the best albums of all time. I'll say it, it's one of the best top 10 albums of all time for me. I think it's their best album. It's The Cure's Disintegration. It is just, talk about a mammoth album. Talk about an album that could have gone a totally different way, because it was so dark and so dense that the record label was like pushing Robert Smith to do more poppy stuff. He said, no, I'm going to do this anyways. Fuck you guys. And it became their biggest selling album, which is, crazy. But it came out in May of 1989. I remember that was also one of the first CDs I bought shortly after Wire's Ibtaba.
Yeah.
And I remember taking it home, looking at the liner notes, and it said on the liner notes something to the extent of, this record has been recorded to be played loud, so turn it up. And if you crank it loud, you get so much more out of it than you do if you listen to it quietly, which, it's not, you can't always do that though. Cause to me, Disintegration for many years, even still, if I have insomnia, it's often one of my insomnia records. I've slept to Disintegration. Really? I've slept to Disintegration hundreds of times. It's just helped lull me to sleep. I find it very soothing, but, my God, somehow they managed to out, it's, I would say it's as dark as pornography, but it's a production, is a collection of songs. It's just stellar. My God, you've got the hits, of course. You've got your love songs and Pictures of You, and
love songs, Pictures of You, yeah.
Fascination Street.
It's a dichotomy. It gave the record label what they wanted with the hits. There's no way that you can deny the song. The songs, Pictures of You, a Lullaby, or anything like that. There's your hits, but we're gonna bury underneath Same Deep Water as You, a fucking 8-minute song that is dense, dark. There's the sound of rain,
all throughout it.
And all throughout it, and it is just as loathing as anything that you may get off of pornography, if you ask me. It is an absolute gem of a record.
Yeah, then you've got the title track, which is also epic.
Yeah, epic, absolutely. Plain Song.
What an opener! The wind chimes, and then boom! It's just like such a fantastic opening to that album.
It's such. I think Plain Song is the song that you can go to as this appeases what the label wants as far as being possibly melodic, yet still as dark as The Cure is.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Robert's songwriting can be, but it's so long that they can't use it as a single.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, you know what? Work with this. How's that? This is what you wanted. This is what I wanted.
Yeah.
They put it into a sandwich. Well, it's such a freaking fantastic record, man.
And Disintegration really typifies kind of what I say is the classic Cure sound, which is like the band plays for 5 minutes before Robert even starts singing, and then he kicks in. That's how you know it's a Cure song. That you're like, when the vocals going to come in? That's why they had to make radio edits for Pictures of You and Fascination Street, because they make you wait for those vocals. But I love that because he puts you in this kind of trance, and also he lifts you out of the trance. It's just that's their patented sound, and it always works because it really also puts the attention on the instrumentation, how the songs are written. So it's not all about his voice.
Yeah.
But you've got Homesick, you've got Last Dance, which is absolutely amazing.
Last Dance.
I mean, it's it's been lauded in pop culture so many times. And remember that South Park said it was the best album ever made. You had it used in Ant-Man. It's like it's everywhere.
Right.
It's one of those rites of passage albums that if you grew up in the era, it was a must have. If you were born after 1989, it's a must have. It's just one of those albums that it's so complete. They would never do one as great as that. That was their last great album. I think Wish is very good, but Disintegration is still is the high watermark. It's got everything. There's not one bad track. There's nothing. It's not. You could call it overindulgent, but it's not because it all works. It's just Smith at his best. You
know what? I don't care. I'll be honest. If you want to call it overindulgent, yeah, sure, it is. But you know what? It's better than your overindulgent record.
Yeah,
that's what I got to say.
Yeah, and
for me, the closest that they've been is Blood Flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Blood Flowers was very, very close.
It's a good album,
but it's still that's a great record. But I think the follow up, the Wish album was a little bit more of what the record label was looking for to get, and so they let them have Wish, but then they served them back up with like something like Blood Flowers, or let's see, what was a record after Wish? That was not Blood Flowers.
That was their worst. That's their worst album.
The 13th,
Wild Mood Swings, which had the 13th on there, which is probably their worst song. There's like 4 really good songs in there, and the rest is just like, bleh.
Oh my god,
that was a big letdown. That album.
Here you go.
Yeah, that was not Disintegration. Disintegration was like, I guess it's the only kind of album that only a band that were still young and have enough hubris to try to pull off would do. I mean, Robert Smith he was like, it's just dark as can be, but it's still very accessible. I mean,
Disintegration is the most perfect album of 1989, period.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
period.
I mean, that's why
out of everything that we've talked about today, it is the most perfect album.
And that's why I'm watching their website like a hawk for any chance of any American tour dates for the Disintegration. Because I will drive to Houston, I will drive to Dallas, I will drive to go see this tour because it's one of my favorite albums, and I want to hear it. I've heard them play plenty of it live. I remember that one tour they did back in 2000 where they did all the dark stuff, which is great.
Yeah.
But to hear it all the way through would be awesome. I mean, I'm
right there with you, man.
I bought it. I bought the original. I actually, a few years ago, I got the deluxe edition for a birthday gift, which they re-released, which has got a bunch of great bonus stuff. It's got, some bonus tracks, the demos, which are interesting to hear. And they're kind of in their infancy. Even there, you can still hear the brilliance, even though it's like a lot more rudimentary and stark. But yeah, I mean, you can't pick a better album in 1989 than Disintegration, and it's still the Cure's best album.
Yep.
And it's probably the best album out of the whole goth genre. I mean, it's it. I mean, I can't really say any more.
We could almost like do an entire show that's track for track on this on that record. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, maybe we should. It's there's just so much to do. But yeah, I think we've covered it. I think
if that record is not in your collection at all, whether you've downloaded it or actually physically owned it, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, listen to it today.
You're doing yourself a disservice.
Listen to it now.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have gone to 1989 as much as humanly possible for doing an entire year in music. Yeah. We have covered it and then some. Or as Spinal Tap David C. Hubbard says, we have traveled the world and elsewhere. We have nailed it. So thanks again.
Yeah, I think so.
Thanks again, Chris, for chiming in. This should be a really good one. I look forward to it.
Thank you for having me. And always appreciate it, man.
And we will do 1994 next. Give a little while for us to rest up on that.
Wonderful. Yeah.
But
Awesome.
thanks again, and we'll do this again very soon.
All right.